So over the weekend, a few different things happened in Call of Duty. One of which was we finally got that interview between Insider Gaming and Charlie Olson, the person that created skill-based matchmaking in Call of Duty. And I considered reacting to the whole interview. It was like, I think, an hour and 17 minutes, but honestly, a lot of it was just kind of bull. So turns out the exclusive ace put out a video on when did SBMM change, EOMM versus volatile skill-based matchmaking, ping is king, and more. So he went through the interview, picked out some specific parts that he found interesting. We might have one or two more other videos this week about this alone. But I think Exclusive Ace breaks these kind of things down pretty well. He has done testing on skill-based matchmaking. So if there's anything that Charlie Olson is saying that he can refute, he's a good person to say so. So let's check out what he's saying. And again, he starts out with who is
on his ace. And today we're going to be talking about a totally revolutionary topic that you've never seen a Call of Duty YouTuber talk about, and this is skill-based matchmaking.
We've never talked about it. I don't even know what it is. Can you enlighten me?
I know this has been beaten to death, but you guys might remember my most recent video talking about skill-based matchmaking was referencing an interview that Insider Gaming did with Charlie Olson, who is a former Call of Duty developer that created the MMR system, or the system that determines what your skill rating is. And that's not to be confused with the matchmaking algorithm that's handled by Demonware.
So the matchmaking algorithm uses the MMR algorithm, and that is the skill part of the matchmaking. So just
now, the reason we're talking about this again today is that article was fairly limited. There were just a few quotes here or there, but just recently, Insider Gaming did a full 1 hour long podcast episode with Charlie Olson, and they got into a lot more depth with many of the topics.
I did find that to be very interesting.
So today, I wanted to pull out some quotes and highlights and discuss that. Obviously, I'm not going to be going through the entire thing. I don't want this to be a 2 hour long video or anything. So I was fairly selective and just picked out the parts that I feel are the most interesting and that I wanted to add to. But obviously there was a whole lot more that was discussed, and I will of course leave a link to the full podcast episode in the description of the video, and I'd highly recommend checking it out if you guys are interested in hearing more. So without further ado, let's dive into the first part here, and this is discussing the early days of the MMR system and how that was handled before Black Ops 3, because that's apparently when they really started taking the MMR algorithm more seriously.
Did he not say Did he not say in the initial interview that it was Infinite Warfare or Advanced Warfare, not Black Ops? Okay, we'll just
the skill algorithm changed a bit. Like I know it was pretty naive pre 2016. Like it was like almost something like average KD ratio, and then put you into 3 different buckets, and then we try to match
he's right,
one bucket on like above or below. So middle could match with anybody, but like the low end would only match with middle tier. So you'd barely notice skill-based matchmaking in that case.
So what he's saying there is he uses average kill-death ratio, and so just take your kill-death ratio, your stat from the barracks, and then when he did that, it would then have 3 buckets. You're either a high kill-death player, medium kill-death, or low kill-death. If you're a low kill-death, you could play with low and medium. If you're a medium kill-death, you could play with any of them, and if you're a high kill-death, you could play with high or medium. So you wouldn't really notice much, except if you were high kill-death, you wouldn't play with like the lowest of low, is essentially what he was saying.
So I found that to be quite interesting, and honestly not all that surprising either. Of course, we've heard it over and over again that skill-based matchmaking has always been in Call of Duty, and often this is pushing back against the people that are unhappy with the modern matchmaking system. But this goes to show that, well, yes, there was skill-based matchmaking back in the day. It was clearly handled very different from what we're dealing with these days. And as you said, you would barely even notice it back in the day. And going off of that, he was asked if the MMR system has changed much since he implemented it back in like the Infinite Warfare days, when that big adjustment happened from the earlier days. And this is what he had to say.
As far as I know, it hasn't changed at all, like in 9 years, whatever it's been.
And that's another point I found to be quite interesting. Once again, just remember, we're talking about the MMR system, not the skill-based matchmaking system itself. Obviously, the matchmaking system needs MMR.
So let's explain this. Let's explain this really, really quickly. So the MMR system, which is what ranks people of how good they are, is the same. But what may have changed is how heavily it's weighted. It may have changed like certain particular instances of how often it's updated, for example, but how it's measured, he thinks is still the same, but he doesn't know that for sure. Keep that in mind.
In order to determine what your skill rating is, to then decide how they're going to matchmake you, but just referring to how they calculate your skill value, as far as he's aware, that hasn't changed at all. And he did mention the reason he feels this is the case is there are certain properties with that system that he created that you can see very clearly, and he is still seeing those properties to this day. Now, moving ahead, when talking about the volatility of this system, that's something he mentioned in the article in the past as well, is this system that they use is quite volatile, and it is based very heavily on your recent performance more than anything. This is what he had to add on to the topic.
The main flaw with it is like that mid-range, like in Ace's numbers, this would be about the -100 to, let's say, like -150 to +100, right, especially. Like those players are going to see a lot bigger changes in their ratings, sort of outside of their control. Like it's just going to spike. But the players at the very top, those actually have less volatility. So it changes less when you're at the extremes, which in a way, you kind of get the worst of both worlds.
So with that, he was actually referencing the video I made where I was sharing the fact that you could get your
I don't understand what he's saying there, so let's let
hidden skill
Smarter Man
data by
explain
doing
it.
a personal data request with Activision. And this was my chart at the time with my skill rating over time with every game that I played of Black Ops 6 up until that point. And as he said, there wasn't a ton of volatility here aside from when I was doing my double XP testing, which immediately after I finished that testing, it tanked my MMR to a degree. It still didn't get down into the negatives or anything, which is kind of what he was referencing. If you're toward the higher skill ranks, you're not going to see as much volatility. You're not going to see it tank as low when you have poor performance. You're still going to be kind of up there in the matchmaking. Whereas for the mid-range players, which he also confirmed that 0 is actually a little bit above average, and the actual average skill rating would be a little bit below 0. But for those players, they're going to see a lot more volatility, where when they perform well, they're going to get spiked up into the lobbies with really good players, where they get stomped back down, and now they're in lobbies where it's too easy for them, and then they stomp, and they're just going to be riding.
So in other words, if you're a good player, you were never going to play with those bad players. Like you're never going to, because of like the less volatility. You may dip down to those mid players, but it's just, if you're in the mid players, you can swing from easy to hard, easy to hard, easy to hard based off of how you're performing. And I would say, I would bet that's what the average player is. That's why when we hear experiences with this, it's like swings either way. They're like, I do really well, I do horrible, I do really well, I do horrible. Whereas if you're in a high level player, every game just feels like, I am playing the same people over and over and over and over and over.
Riding that roller coaster back and forth, which I've heard from many people over the years. That's what their experience has been. And it can feel very artificial. And it can feel like the game is punishing you when you perform well and then giving you pity games when you perform poorly. And that's just not a good experience for many players. Next up, he confirmed something that I've been mentioning for years now, at least just based on feel, as well as just statistically how things would work this way. But this has to do with playlists, and let's have a listen to what he has to say here.
Switching playlists. So if you're playing TDM, that's going to have the best like team balancing and tightest matchmaking.
Because there's the most
you have
people,
the highest population, and the rating system is like designed around TDM. But when you jump between playlists, you're going to see like if you were to go to Hardpoint from TDM, like you're going to get jolted.
So the first part of that is the part I've mainly been mentioning. Modes with higher player counts are going to allow the matchmaking system to work as hard as possible. And Team Deathmatch historically has always been the highest played game mode, just because it's usually the first option there. It's also the simplest option. So that just appeals heavily to the vast majority of casual players out there. And as a result, it just makes sense that the higher the player pool is, and the more people that are currently searching for a match within the playlist that you're searching for, the harder that matchmaking system is able to work. The more likely it'll be to find people of a similar skill rating to you to put you in a lobby with. Whereas if you're playing in a much lower player count mode, the matchmaking system can only go so far. Since time is a factor, they have to get you into a match within a reasonable amount of time. And if in that moment...
Does it mean by jolted, you'll get a wider variety? Is that what...
There's really only one viable lobby that it can put you in, then it's going to throw you in there regardless of skill level. And we can extrapolate that logic a little bit. This also means when you play during off-peak hours, you're also going to get a much better mix of lobbies. The matchmaking system can't be working as hard because there are fewer...
So that's why lately, as the player count has gone down, it may feel as though there's less SBMM because they can't be as strict with it. Interesting.
People to matchmake you with. And this is something I've been mentioning for years. It's one of the biggest reasons that many of the gameplays you see on my channel are due to the fact that I purposely play during off-peak hours. I've noticed my experience is better during that time, and I want my experience to be the best it can be. And I'm in a very fortunate position where this is my job, so I have the freedom to play during off-peak hours. So it's nice to see that he effectively confirmed that with his mention of TDM having the more strict skill-based matchmaking attached to it, at least partially due to the fact that the matchmaking pool is bigger. Now, on top of that, though, something interesting he mentioned that I hadn't really thought about or considered much is jumping between game modes can be a very jolting experience. And this is due to the fact that the MMR system doesn't appear to be perfectly tuned on a game mode basis. So if you play Team Deathmatch for a while, your skill rating is going to be adjusted to match how you're playing in that moment in Team Deathmatch. But then when you switch to a different mode, you only have that one unified skill rating. So you're taking your skill rating that was just calculated with you playing TDM, and now that's being transferred into the new mode you're going into, like Hardpoint, for instance.
Okay.
And you may not be at that same skill rating for the Hardpoint game mode, and there might be a mismatch there, meaning you get a drastically different skill experience when transitioning from one game mode to the next. So apparently, according to Olsen here, sticking to one game mode only should lead to less volatility overall when it comes to your matchmaking
So more of your games will feel the same if you play the same game mode. I think that's pretty straightforward.
compared to constantly swapping between game modes. After that, he went on to address engagement optimized matchmaking in Call of Duty. So let's just have a listen to what he has to say here.
To jump to the engagement optimized, even conspiracy theories where people think like, oh yeah, it's taking in all this data about you and then figuring out exactly what it needs to retain you. Like, as far as I know, and as far as I can tell, like they're still not doing that. Like the matchmaking paper that they published has nothing about that in there. And I would take that at their word. Like they have no reason to lie about it. So it really is like just a side effect of the rating system being volatile and having that built-in whiplash.
So as he said in the article in the past,
yeah. Okay, wait. That's exactly it, right? So it's actually, he's saying from what he's reading, he doesn't work there anymore, but from what he's reading, it's the same system that they used when he was there. That whiplash thing is just how quickly or how frequently it's going to change your MMR. And in turn, it makes it feel as though one good game, one bad game, one good game, one bad game. Specifically for me, it's I get on one decent game, one good game, 70, 80 kill game of domination or hardpoint, and then throw to the wolves for like 3 games, 1 or 2 good games, 3 bad games. And maybe that's just how I play, but like that's pretty much the system that I see it. And that's the volatility. And he's saying it has nothing to do with trying to improve your engagement. It is more so to do with just how volatile it is, which you could directly argue and say, well, if they've used this system and it's there to increase engagement, then skill-based matchmaking is in turn engagement optimized matchmaking. Let's see if anyone corrects me.
Engagement optimized matchmaking is there. I suspect there's going to be some pushback here with what he said. The first thing being, he hasn't been with Call of Duty for many years at this point, and therefore he's just speaking to the best of his knowledge, and it is very possible that they have implemented that and he's just not aware of it at this point. That's a very real possibility, but the other part I wanted to address here is the fact that he mentioned that with the volatility of the matchmaking system that Call of Duty uses, it can often feel like engagement optimized matchmaking. And he actually expanded on this a little bit after mentioning that Marvel Rivals does have an actual engagement optimized matchmaking system in place, and they are open about that. So we kind of contrasted.
Yeah,
the
they are
here.
actually. Yeah.
Yeah, if you stayed in one playlist or like one game mode, you would lose so many, or you would get wrecked, and then it's like, okay, you must suck at the game. You're going to get an easier match, but it isn't. It still isn't that like all-knowing engagement optimized. It's just your MMR is tanked. Here's a favorable team balance. It's streak breaking, but it's not like prescribed deliberate streak breaking, which is again what like the Rivals matchmaker would do. Be like, oh, you lost 5 matches. That increases your churn risk. We're going to give you some bots.
So this is where I feel there's a lot of really valid criticism and pushback against statements like this. It's basically saying there isn't engagement optimized matchmaking, but effectively speaking, it's going to feel just like engagement optimized matchmaking.
That's exactly what I was saying.
And so from a player's perspective, at least, it doesn't really matter what you call it. You can call it your volatile skill-based matchmaking or performance-based matchmaking or engagement optimized matchmaking.
Or boring-based matchmaking or manipulative matchmaking. I think that's what we should call it. We should call it manipulative. Seriously? Okay, like jokes aside, manipulative matchmaking. Stick with that.
It all seems to feel the same anyway. In either case, following this, he was asked, do you think they will bring engagement optimized matchmaking in the future to Call of Duty?
Probably not, because when you're a juggernaut like COD, like if it's not broken, you don't fix it. Like that's just the mantra. I mean, they're selling really well year after year. Retention is actually strong, despite what people will have you believe from Steam numbers and despite what streamers would say. So I would be surprised if they did like a dramatic change in the matchmaker. I think they're like the tech works pretty well.
So it seems he thinks that nothing is really going to be changing, at least significantly, with the skill-based matchmaking system. They're probably not going to try to mess with things because it's simply working for them. And he did mention the mantra of, if it's not broken, don't fix it. I wish that applied to many of the core gameplay elements of Call of Duty, but that doesn't seem to always apply. And while he did mention retention is actually strong, despite what streamers would say and Steam charts and everything, he's probably right on that when it comes to the really large player pool of just highly casual players. But at least to me, it seems pretty clear that their core audience, the audience that interacts with the game outside of the game itself, so the ones that are watching YouTube videos and streams and talking about the game online, based on my experience being heavily involved in this community for many years, this seems to be the biggest drop in hype or interest that I've seen with a Call of Duty game.
By far. And not just because like the overall sentiment is low, but more specifically because of how high things, like, I will tell you right now, like just being completely honest, on Inkslasher, the main channel, the Call of Duty channel, the month that Call of Duty came out this year was my second best month ever. We're talking including the launch of Warzone, including COVID, including all of that, my second best month ever. Just the December after it was my third worst month since I have done it full time. And yes, I made less videos and stuff, but it, like, not even close. Like, I do that every December. Like, that's nothing new. So like that huge spike to huge drop I've never seen before. That's what Ace is talking about there. And yeah, that's the hardcore audience that he's bringing up.
From the launch period until this time of the year, this many months after launch. And this is something where it does seem clear that he recognizes there are problems, especially for the higher skill groups of players, which are in the minority, of course. And he just expanded a little bit on some potential room for improvement that he sees in these areas.
I think the opportunity, though, as a player, especially like the top 10% player who is extremely affected by skill-based matchmaking, and even like the 60th percentile and up, is transparency. Like, I could see them offering more transparency, like we had talked about at DICE. Like, that's a viable mitigation, like almost a solution. But you could get transparency, and I think you could get fine-tuning of the matchmaking algorithm, so it's not so punishing for like the subset of players like you guys.
It's nice to see somebody actually acknowledge that there are real problems on the higher ends, and we do have a right to complain about this. And there is potential for making improvements here, like even just being more transparent. It wouldn't solve the issue, but for many, it would at least help alleviate the issue a little bit.
He's giving different answers than I thought he would, because again, he works for a company that sells skill-based matchmaking. They sell MMR systems. They say, we'll come into your game, we'll implement an MMR system, and it'll work for your multiplayer. Like, that's what his job is. That's what his company does. And I thought that he would be selling it more, but he's not. He's like, he kind of is and he kind of isn't. Like, he's saying it can be done well and it should be done well. It needs to be done well. And I'm assuming that there are parts of this interview where he does say that and Ace just doesn't have them in there. But he is also ripping into it and being like, transparency is important.
I know I would at least be a bit less harsh on this if we could see where we stand. That's one of my big issues with their current implementation of skill-based matchmaking, is you never get to see where you stand and you can't track your improvement over time. If I could do that, well, that at least addresses one of my big concerns with the system. Also, I like that he mentioned that there's perhaps some room for fine-tuning and optimization so it feels less punishing on the higher end of the skill brackets. As for the next topic, I just wanted to pop this into the video here, just because I did see a lot of comments like this in my previous video, and kind of want to let Charlie Olson just sort of speak for himself here and address these comments directly.
To preemptively address some of the common accusations against me, like, oh, you wrote the MMR system, or you wrote skill-based matchmaking, so of course you support it. But like, it doesn't matter if I support it or not. Like, would Activision keep a system in place that doesn't increase retention? Like, they can see, like, they A/B test this.
Yeah,
like,
it sucks.
Again,
He's
in the
right.
papers, like, they're not lying about the A/B test results.
Why
They're
wouldn't
not
they?
Like, oh, skill-based matchmaking drives away half of our players. Let's keep it. Like, would a company that's as profit-driven as Activision, they're a business, but, you know, they're nefarious in the like streamer community or YouTube community of being just like a hardcore, I guess, ruthlessly profit. Would a company like that keep a system that was driving away half of their players?
And this is totally true. Most of us have known this to be the case for a long time. There's a reason the skill-based matchmaking system is still there and they're still using it. And that is based on the tons and tons of data that they have. It obviously suggests that this helps the most with the player retention for the majority of players.
So the one thing that I will say is I think there needs to be a long-term test done. If you look at like when they say that they've run tests, from what I've seen, they run them for like a week at a time or like a weekend or things like this. I would be very curious to see if it, like a month long or even year long test of player retention in Call of Duty. Like a new game comes out and they're just like, we're biting the bullet this year. Let's remove skill-based matchmaking and see how this year does each month comparatively to the years before where skill-based matchmaking has been present. Because running a week-long test, what are they comparing it to? I would love more information on those tests.
There's, at least in the short term, which is typically where corporations are looking. They're just looking at that next quarter. And that segues into the next thing that Charlie talked about a little bit here. And this has always been my primary concern with skill-based matchmaking, is not necessarily the short-term effects, because obviously it's working short-term for them. It's more so the long-term effects that it's having on the
I swear to God, I have not watched this video.
franchise and the burnout we're seeing, especially with the previously most dedicated and loyal fan base.
I would say it isn't supported by data, but you do have to consider that maybe Activision isn't seeing what they can't measure. Like, so they can see the short-term retention. They can.
I didn't
see
watch
like
either
the
of these, I
monthly
swear to God, but this is
retention and
exactly what I was just saying.
Revenue over the life cycle of the game, but are they doing damage to the brand long-term? Like, are you burning out those players who, you know, otherwise would stick around long-term and buy more titles? So there is a case that they are kind of blind to what they can't measure, at least in that short window.
So I'm glad this point was brought up as well. I'm very curious to see what happens in the next couple of years for Call of Duty. I mean, the consensus here is the big changes happened with Modern Warfare 2019, which was like 5 years ago at this.
So this year is going to be so telling because they're releasing another Black Ops game. Apparently it's going to have 3D movement, which people already don't like. So this is, if they're going to test something, this is the year, right? Like if the game, they just don't think it's going to perform well, this is the year.
And over this time, I have been seeing more and more of the longtime Call of Duty fans burning out, but is that being outpaced by new players that are coming in and don't have an issue or don't even know it exists? I don't really know, but I am curious to see if those long-term effects are really going to start to show themselves, especially over the next year or two of Call of Duty. In either case, let's now transition into his thoughts on the current way that they handle ranked play in Call of Duty.
See,
I don't like the current rank system. Like, partly because my feelings hurt because I thought World War II, I thought we had a great system there, and Treyarch should have built on that, and instead they threw it out and made their own system from scratch. And I hate hidden MMR because it sets a limit.
so yeah, there's an hidden MMR in ranked play right now. I don't know if you knew that, but
It sets a cap on like where you're going to be. So this thing is going to learn your skill really quickly behind the scenes, and yet that's going to control where you can get to. Like, it's not even like you're not earning points anymore. You're just revealing your MMR. It's just fake. Like, I hate it as a player myself.
And this is something many people have expressed frustration with the
I'm going to be honest with you. If any of you are watching this and played ranked play back in World War II when he's talking about, can you explain to me what that system was back then? Because I don't remember it and I'd have to completely look it up because I'm curious what that would be. And if it was one of the ones that your rank was dependent on how many games you played, I do not like that. I think you need placement matches. I think the best ranked plays that I have played, you play like 5 ranked matches and it puts you in, those are your placement matches. It places you, and then you either go up and down based off of your wins and losses and maybe how you perform depending on the game. And it's taken from there.
Modern rank systems that they use. For those that are unaware, they are using a hidden MMR system. So they have your actual hidden skill rank, which they can determine very quickly, as he said. So they essentially know very quickly roughly where you should be ranked, but they want to make it sort of a journey for you to unveil what your actual ranking is.
So they also, that's not actually what I was talking about. So they have the hidden MMR where they're like, you play 5 games, they're like, oh, you're going to be gold 3 or whatever they're going to put you. But they like make you play all the way up to it to like put you on this so-called journey, but you're not going to play against every player in bronze. You're going to play predominantly against the players who also should be towards that higher end direction or whatnot.
Even though they know that right away, they could just place you there and then you work your way up or down from that point. That's just not how the modern rank matchmaking system works, and that causes a lot of very justified frustration for players. And I like the fact that he mentioned the World War II ranked system. That system was excellent. You could actually see your exact skill rating value as well as the skill rating value for every player in your lobby. And everything about that system just felt a lot more rewarding and satisfying and also more transparent. It just seemed to make much more sense. And it's really unfortunate, like he said, that they didn't build off of that system, and instead they scrapped it and started with a new one. Next up, Olsen addressed the ping is king statement that we saw from the white paper, and we've seen it stated many times over the years.
So ping is king, and that gets the highest weight, but 7 times whatever your ping score is, +6, +5, +4, like those other variables can override whatever the ping input is.
Now, my response to this is basically the same that it has been for quite some time. I think this is just one of those cases of it depends on your interpretation of what ping is king means. And they use a very loose...
What it actually means, I will tell you what it actually means. It's the first thing they look at. Then they look at a bunch of other things, and then you're putting it into a lobby. That's what it means. It does not mean it's the number one factor. It doesn't mean you will always have a 40 ping server at the worst. It means we want you to have a 40 or under ping server, but then we'll put into all of these things into effect, and then we'll decide.
Interpretation where ping is king, as in it is the most heavily weighted value. However, the other variables do come into play, and they can potentially override that. And hearing that to me, and I'm sure to many others out there, to me that doesn't sound like a king at all. When I hear ping is king, my interpretation is ping is first decided, and then variables like skill can come into play after that. So if there's 2 lobbies with the exact same ping, because ping is king, and the king can't be overridden, then at that point, sure, if I'm a higher skill player, put me in the higher skill lobby out of those 2 that have the equal ping. That's not how it works, and many of us know that based on our experiences. Our ping can jump around like crazy from one game to the next. Now, going off that, he did mention that he thinks there is room for optimization based on the white paper that they released. He said there was a red flag that popped up as far as the system that they use surrounding that, and this is what he had to say going off of that.
There's room, there's probably possibilities to improve the matchmaker to make it so that those weights are considered like ping is really the most important, and then playlist if you optimize that matchmaker.
So that's pretty interesting to hear, but I mean, he was talking about some very technical details here that most of us don't really understand anyway, and I feel like it's probably not actually going to go anywhere, just kind of an interesting note. And then one last clip that I wanted to pick out here from this very long video was in regards to playing with friends, especially friends of different skill levels.
Ooh.
That is a real problem, and that's what part of that is the tightness of the matchmaking. Like if you do get lobbies that are tightly matched, then yeah, your outlier friends, like the low skill friend, is just going to be way over their head.
And then he went on to say,
so I almost always play with nearly a full lobby, because most of the time I play on stream, and I do open lobbies every single time I stream. So you should be there. If you want to play games with me, you should be there. Predominantly, if I play solo, it's a miserable time for me. I might get one good game a stream. If I play with a party of people, almost every game I play is easier than if not, except for if I had a few insane games, then it'll drop me down like we talked about earlier. But if I play solo, it's a gong show. Now, there are certain people that come into the stream who are very, very good, as good as me, sometimes better. If I just play with them, it's like playing by myself, like I explained. But you get one player who's just a little bit worse than you, and it's immediately a better experience. But it's also almost always a worse experience for them, if that makes sense.
say this as well.
And that's bad for the brand too. I mean, like the social effect is what retains players like long term. So
what retains players long term is playing with their friends. And if you can't play with your friends, or at least half the people you're playing with are not going to have a good time, that's a problem.
Seems like low hanging fruit to address.
So again, it's nice to see that he recognizes there are some clear issues here, and I do think having the ability to play and have fun with mixed skilled friends in regular, casual public matches, not ranked play, that is something that's very important, and that's one of the arguments against the current skill-based matchmaking system that I think is pretty hard to push back against. I know some people will say, well, too bad, they gotta suck it up, and if they're a real friend, they'll just stick around and they'll get stomped because they want to spend time with you. But in reality, it seems that's rarely the case, and many high-skill players have dealt with this over the years, where they just have lower-skill friends that don't want to play with them because their experience is so much better when they play solo. So yeah, I totally agree as well that the social aspect of the game is incredibly important, especially for long-term retention. And I feel that's an area they've ignored heavily. And that leads me to one last point that I was really hoping would be discussed throughout this podcast, but it wasn't brought up at all. And this is disbanding lobbies and how that interacts with the matchmaking system. I personally think the fact that they forced disbanding lobbies on...
Can someone answer this? I got lots of questions today, apparently. I think it was Black Ops 4, but I could be wrong. But I think it was Black Ops 4 or Infinite. It might have been Infinite Warfare. Or Infinite Warfare that introduced... I think it was Infinite Warfare that introduced disbanding lobbies. And that's when he said that they implemented this new system. So obviously it's an important part of whatever matchmaking system they are using.
On us is just as bad, if not worse, than the matchmaking system itself. It leads to a lot of issues with consistency, not only in your gameplay experience from one game to the next, since you're playing with largely the same people from one game to the next, but also connection consistency, because you can't just find a lobby on a particular server and stay on that server all night long. It also kills the social aspect of the game, since in all likelihood, you're never going to see that other player on the other team again anyway, or at least it's not likely you're going to see him in the next match that you play. I mean, it's possible you will. We do see it from time to time, but there's no guarantee there. It's not a lobby that's sticking together and a group of players sticking together game after game after game to develop those friendships and rivalries. So I would have loved to hear his thoughts on that as well. But in either case, that is going to wrap it up for today's video. Just picking out all of the main points that I wanted to pick out of that podcast. Like I said, there was a whole lot more going on with that. It was quite a long one. And if you're interested in more, I'd highly recommend checking that out. I did skip over a good handful of other things that were mentioned as well. And this is where I want to hear from you guys in those comments.
I'm going to check out the comments.
How did you feel about this podcast? Whether it's just the clips that I shared today, or if you watched the entire thing, I'd love to.
Let's check out the comments. Okay, what do we have here? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Then give me Black Ops 2 matchmaking back. That's a good point. Ping isn't king. Ping is one of 7 princes. Jev said that? Oh, great quote. COD as a whole will never improve until skill-based matchmaking is toned down significantly and servers are upgraded. That's just... I don't need to read any more comments. That's it. That's if you ever need a quote to use to give them, servers, you could add in hacking, servers, hacking, SBMM. Fix those 3. Now we're talking. That's it. That's all you need to know.